completely machinima. And now for something completely machinima. And now for something completely machinima.
Hello and welcome to And Now for Something Completely Machinima, the podcast about machinima, virtual production, and related technologies. My name's Phil Rice, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Damien Valentine.
Hello.
And Tracy Harwood.
Hello.
Ricky is off this week. He's water skiing in the Himalayas. We hope to see him back very soon. I don't know where that came from.
No, I don't know where that came from.
So this week is my my film pick, and this one was delivered up to me by the algorithm a couple months back. And it's called Wracu, I believe is how it's pronounced. The filmmaker's name is Chase McGill, and it kind of caught my attention first and foremost because it was a final project for his university studies. So he was in the USC, or University of Southern California, animation program. I believe that university is based in Los Angeles, but definitely Southern California. So it's kind of become a pretty prestigious place to study that because of the internship and job placement opportunities that are right there in, Hollywood, which is next door. So, and he produced this work in Blender as his final project. And I haven't been able to find out a great deal about him after university. I mean, this is very recent. It's only from about 4 months ago that the film was put out. But I imagine he's gone on to do something to keep him busy, because this film is a great example of filmmaking, storytelling, but in use of Blender as well. So I'll spoiler alert, it's probably not going to be possible to talk much about this film without spoilers. So if you have not seen the film yet, pause here and go watch it and come back. We'll have a link to it in the description, as always. So this film is, so the what it reminded me of before I later read a couple paragraphs on his website, and he said this was a deliberate influence, but it gave me the vibe of like Beowulf, like that era of epic tales, epic poems and such, and kind of a fantasy aspect to it. I mean, Beowulf and stuff like that really is the roots of what later would come to full blossom in Tolkien and writers like that who really fleshed out the fantasy genre. But it goes way back. This, the era of swords and sorcery, if you will. So the film begins with this character kind of apparently waking up, and he's on some kind of a horse-drawn carriage. He's not sure. He gets his bearings, and then there's a curtain he can part to look and see who's driving the carriage, and it is a skeleton. We presume it's Death. So the indication is that he has died, and it becomes pretty quickly apparent that he's just not having it.
That's definitely one way to put it.
Yeah. So he overpowers the. I'm trying to avoid words that might get us flagged for having to mark this as adult content, but he overcomes the driver and decides to seek vengeance, presumably on the person or force that did slay him. And so he journeys to this enormous Gothic castle and goes and has a big standoff with this huge character. And again, that's really contributes to that Beowulf type of storytelling where heroes and villains are larger than life, and this towering figure wearing a really intriguing mask that I know that I've seen somewhere before.
Mm.
The what it makes me think of, and Tracy, you can maybe later correct me or steer me on this, but there was a movie called Kingdom of Heaven that was
Oh, yeah.
about the Crusades. And if I'm remembering it right, one of the leaders, the king of the Europeans, was wearing a mask like that. But if I understand it right, is because they had some kind of disease. Maybe it was leprosy or
Yeah, I think it was.
one of those, really rough diseases.
Yeah.
And so he was wearing this mask, and it had a very similar look to it, where there's an eeriness to it, the fact that it shows just one expression, right? And that it actually is shaped like a face. It's not just a grate like a knight might wear. It's actually shaped to appear like a face. And so he battles this towering figure, and it's not an easy fight. But in the end, he prevails. I mean, it looks very much like he's going to be sent right back to that carriage with death, but instead he meets death at the door of the castle with a trophy from the, let's say, monster that he has slain. I'm It's implied there's no speaking in this movie at all, which is another thing that I love about it. But you kind of get the sense that this is a transaction, that Death needed to have somebody, and so he's offering up the trophy of this monster in his stead, and he will presumably not have to die right then. Something like that, right? Uh, it's a familiar story and yet strange, and yet feels rooted in something ancient. He succeeds in that regard. I feel like that if you're at all familiar with the tradition of those very, very, very old stories, it feels like it comes from that stock, right? And then it's just beautifully animated, beautifully lit. The use of light and shadow is just terrific, especially in those opening shots where he's in the carriage and it's kind of like just lamplight or maybe torchlight, and just he uses it so perfectly to show just what he wants to of the face. The filmmaker does. Just wonderfully done. The blocking and the shot selection as he approaches the castle, and it just looms large and he's right down in the center. Just wonderful. The battle sequence is great. It's definitely motion capture animations, which I imagine being at a university in a animation program. He probably had, like when I was in school and I was in a music program, I had access to the recording studio. That's where I learned everything that I know about that. He probably had similar access to resources there that would be pretty tough for people like you and I to have. So, and the score was done by the Budapest Scoring Orchestra, I believe is what it's called. And this is basically one of those, it's an orchestra for hire that you can actually hire for sessions from anywhere in the world and conduct the session over Zoom. When I recorded an album last year or year before, I used a very similar service called Musiversal. And all the session recordings with musicians were done that way. I never had to leave home. One of them was in Hungary, one was in Brazil. They were scattered all over the place. One was in Denver, Colorado. But basically just we would over Zoom conduct these sessions, and they've got software that makes the timing of the audio line up properly with the Zoom call. And he used that type of service here for this orchestra. I have no idea what he paid. They don't publish their prices on their website.
Yeah.
But it's probably not cheap. But it's certainly, much more affordable than, going to the London Symphony Orchestra and getting them to play and record your piece. This This is a group of professional orchestral musicians that this is what they do. They're in the studio. They've got the engineers. They've got everything mic'd properly, and they will crank out a song. I think that the stats on that typically are, if you have a 5 minute song that's scored with a full orchestra, all the parts, that they can get you a finished, final, error-free recording in 30 minutes.
Wow.
A 30-minute session will get you a completed 5 minute song. You want longer score, then you got to do longer than that. But that's how those work. It's a fascinating development that is only made possible by the technology today. And so he made use of that. I don't know if he paid for it out of his pocket or maybe the university had some kind of arrangement, but the effect is really good. The music is very strong. It everything about this is really just very professional looking. So I really enjoyed watching this and enjoyed, with no small amount of envy, the amount of talent in somebody who, I assume this was a 23, 24-year-old kid, 22-year-old kid finishing a degree. Amazing. Bright future for this person, I'm sure, if they won it. So what did you guys think?
Um, I started watching it, and the first thing that made me think, okay, I'm in for something good, is something very subtle. It's the opening shot when the camera's kind of going up to the window of the carriage, and you can see the character inside. And he was moving slightly as the carriage was moving over rough ground, and he was just kind of twitching a little bit, the way he would if he really was sat in there. And I thought, most people making machinima, this isn't an insult because there's only so much you can think of, would not think to do that kind of detail. Or I don't know, it's just but he did it, and it was a subtle thing that it just suddenly thought, oh, he's going into this much effort to tell the story, and he's crafting it. And the way the character moved felt very natural as well. Like he wasn't going like this or really over the top. It was just a very subtle wobble, and it accompanied the sound as well, so that you get the sound effect to make for the carriage to go over something a little bit rougher, and then the wobble would match up with that perfectly. So that's what immediately grabbed my attention, and it sounded like a really daft thing to grab you, but it did. And then of course it's visually stunning all the way through. I did like that bit where Death turns around, and he has that encounter with him. Um, and the animation was, stunning. I think you're right, it was motion captured because of the way it was done. It's just something about it feels really real. But there's no clipping on, like he's wearing a full suit of armor in the fight scene. So when they did the motion capture, they obviously did a lot of cleanup to make sure that that armor didn't clip through his chest, which is something that, if you've done anything like this, you have to be aware of that as an issue when you've done motion captures. You can very easily clip yourself. Obviously not in real life, but your characters can. But he did it. He put a lot of effort into all of that. I don't know if he did the motion capture himself or if he found people that could do the fight sequences and he just directed them. Um, did the choreography and so on. I think my favorite shot has got to be the one where he's looking at that castle and you kind of got it's all in shadow and he's in shadow and you can just about see the grass and then you've got the sky on the horizon and it's got like a sunset kind of view. So the sky's kind of lit up, but everything else is very shadowy and dark. And you kind of got a mist in the background as well. I thought that was a very inspiring shot. I'm working on a video at the moment as a commission project, and I kind of felt a little bit inspired by that, what I just saw in this video, to think, I can do better with the lighting in this commission project. So I went back and I'm not saying I copied what he was doing. I just thought, this could look better if I did something better with the lighting. And so I'm happier with the results of that. And it's because of this film. And I think it's a film I need to go back and watch again several times because there's a lot there. So he's a student and he's just graduating. This is his final project. But if he gets snapped up by some film studio, we're probably not going to get to identify his work specifically. We may see his work in something else, but we won't know it necessarily it's him, which is it's good for him. He gets a steady job, but it'd be nice to watch his work and say, "Oh, this is this guy," because I'd like to see more of his work. This is obviously his creation, his story, his film. But if he gets hired by an effects studio or an animation studio, he's going to be working with a team, which is great. But I'd like to see his individual work as well because he's got the imagination for it. I think we've discussed many times in the past where people who know the effects and the animation will put out a visually stunning looking film, but there's nothing to it because they haven't got the
Right,
storytelling
right.
craft. This
Mm.
guy's got that too. And he does it in that way we also talked about, and Phil, you mentioned it just now. There's no dialogue in this film, which is very hard to pull off to tell the story with no spoken words. But he does it. So he's got this storytelling craft. So it'd be nice to see him not just animating, but directing. I think he's got a good future ahead of him for that kind of work. So yeah, I hope we get to see more of what he does because it's very impressive, and it's probably my favorite pick of the month.
Oh, interesting. Well, I've got a slightly different view of this. Slightly. Um, and I'll preface what I'm going to say with a comment that it's only because I think this guy is good that I'm being quite critical. Okay, I think that's my overriding thought, really. I'm going to be critical.
Okay.
Um, okay, so when I started watching this, I know it said Blender in the title, but you know what? It immediately struck me as being Unreal Engine immediately because of that kind of hyper polished, even medieval, those kind of medieval Doom pieces that we've seen before. Um, but the fact that it was made with Blender and mocap actually kind of changed how I felt about it. Now, for me, the setup was a little bit Bergmanish, doing that kind of. I felt it was doing that kind of sort of what do you call it? Seventh Seal thing, where the setting isn't really historical. The point being made is one more philosophical. Um, so you've got a knight, death, a carriage, and this whole kind of silent existential punishment loop thing going on, which you've talked about. The no dialogue, just the vibes that are being portrayed. And it really commits to that. It's really, the atmosphere is absolutely everything in this, and it's done really well. Um, but I did feel that the point was that the knight wasn't so much a character as more of a question about what mortality might be in this kind of space. And and then you got these kind of slow-mo battle kind of shots that, yeah, the choreography kind of works, but we've seen better choreography. Um, have to say what I think really works for this film is actually the sound is. I mean, don't get me wrong, the detail in the and the fidelity of the images at the start, absolutely brilliant. But it's the sound design that really pulls this through. Because you get the feeling that everything is built from scratch, and you can kind of tell that it is. You kind of have the sound of creaking wood, the armor shifting, the wind, then you've got crows and crickets and all of that kind of stuff going on. But if you really listen very carefully, not a lot of variation in what you're actually hearing, but it's certainly the soundscape that's actually conveying the atmosphere. Um, Making that kind of world that this guy's in feel more physical instead of like a cutscene, really. But I don't think without the sound the film would land nearly as well as it does. And then of course you've got the music, which frankly is excellent. I saw the recording that you put a link to, Phil, which we'll share as well on the show notes, of them making making the music for this thing. CJ Thomas recorded with that scoring orchestra, really impressive, have to say. I don't know how much something like that would cost. But I would say it's worth every penny to put out a portfolio piece like I feel this is. Have to say though, music to me feels quite safe. It tells you exactly what it is you should feel, and it never really changes the tone of those kind of visuals. You know exactly what it is you're getting. And the mocap is interesting too. You know what I especially like you said, Damien, I like the detail and the very small, tiny human movements, the posture, the kind of the hesitation, the little head movements. Um,
The limp at the end is what really
yeah,
got me. That
all
was
of
well
Good
it.
too.
done.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I mean, that actually gives it real performance weight. But I'm going to be picky now. Um, because to me, the emotion in it, and there is a portrayal of something I suppose would be more like anguish broadly, but there isn't really anything very specific. And I think it would be fair to say that the mocap, whilst it gives it a sense of realism, it does not give it intentionality. Um, and I'll tell you why I think that is. I think what you're seeing here is something that is visually very, very controlled. I feel that this is where the difference between Blender and Unreal really shines through, or is very evident. I feel that what you've got portrayed here is a Blender pipeline. Everything feels very authored. It's kind of really tight around the lighting, around the materials, around the composition. It's all very, very deliberate and it's very polished. I mean, the skin and the whites of the eye and the detail in the cornea of the eye and everything. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's that level of polish though that I think actually comes with a trade-off because it feels, what's the word? It feels rendered, not really captured in the sense of what a story might be. And it's almost too perfect,
Hmm.
which is which is an odd thing to kind of say, I think, but it did. It felt too perfect to me. And I think the film itself could have made a much bigger swing into the story arc. I think ultimately I actually felt it was a film of two very distinct halves. For me, the second part of it just didn't live up to the expectation set by that incredible fidelity and the almost ambiguity that you saw in the first half of it. I love that sort of that reveal. I mean,
What's the just I'm curious, what's the point of demarcation for you in the as the what's the halfway point of the story? Is it when he gets
that
down from the tree or is it before that?
it's it's yeah, it's before the tree.
Okay.
It's before the tree. And when he gets into the choreographed battle scene, he's lost it for me, unfortunately. And I think it's because there's too many, the armor and the king's castle and the almost the roundhead type armory and the king's mask and all of that and what he's wearing. They don't gel for me. They don't just fit together easily. And it's too stiff a fight somehow. Somehow. And I like what you said about what you thought the story was. That's not how I read it, actually. I read it as though he wakes up or he comes around or comes to a realization that he's being, transported to the other side of the river, so to speak, which in itself is a weird thing given the time period. Um, and and then he sits back and realizes how he's come to be in this predicament. And when the door opens at the end and reveals, the guy standing there with his instrument of death, um, he's collecting him, and that's the point at which he realizes he's in the carriage and off he's going, kind of thing. So I don't read it in quite the same way as you, and it could be that that's a good thing, right? It could be
Hmm.
that's a sort of different interpretation of it, but to me the best bit of it was that first part, and that lack of detail. I suspect this is a guy whose specialism is characters, not um, not scenes. I suspect that's what his animation specialism is, and that's what he's been working on specifically in his degree. Um, like I said, I mean, I appreciate that there has to be a kind of a reveal, but ultimately, I think, although technically very good, that second part just left me a little bit there. And bear in mind that I'm only saying it because I think this is a very talented creator, and I actually think they have a lot of scope to go an awful lot further. Um, my view is that, he could have been a lot more experimental with virtual production. And I actually think, to my point right at the beginning about Unreal Engine, had he have used something like Unreal Engine, um, that might have given him a different take on it. Now, I don't know if you remember, we reviewed some time ago a film called, it's a couple of years ago now, called Forlorn. And it actually had a very similar look and feel to this. It was a professional team that put it together, I have to say.
This
But
is the one that had a female protagonist, right? And she
that
goes into a castle and confronts a big beast.
that's
I
it.
remember that. Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I
it.
remember that
Yeah.
too.
Well, that was made using Unreal Engine, and um, frankly, I think it was in terms of that particular film, that was those guys showing off what Unreal could do for them and their creative practice. And I think whereas Forlorn made much more of the what I'd call the game residue, Wracu here is fundamentally focusing on the cinematic spectacle. But I think if you think about what Forlorn was doing, you could actually feel that the camera existed inside this kind of navigable environment with almost like a level, levels laid out, if you like. And you got the sense of it being more persistent and that you could kind of move around in it. And that was really good for scale. It was really good for spectacle. And I think that sort of approach helped those people tell a narrative story. And I think what's different here, and probably why I feel a bit more inclined to criticize it, is because everything is very constructed, shot by shot constructed. And you feel that very immediately. There's no sense, for example, at the beginning when you feel the space you could move around in that carriage with that guy. There is no sense of it being navigable in any kind of way. It's presented to you. Every shot is, it's composed, it's lit, it's controlled to a degree really that I never felt Forlorn ever was. And if this guy picks our review up, I'd encourage him to have a look at Forlorn and see what I mean. So so with it, you kind of get precision, but not realism. That's
So
what I mean.
basically, you get the sense that with Forlorn, that they built an environment
Yes,
and then like
bits of it.
fully decked out, and then almost like you would a game level, right? It's full
Yes,
and complete. And then from within there, they chose where to place the camera and set up these shots, whatever. And
exactly.
for his, you get the impression that he constructed everything around where the camera was going to look.
Yeah,
And
that's how I
only
read it.
that it feels more like sets than environments. Is
Definitely.
that right? Okay.
That's how I feel about it. That's why I feel the story's a bit stilted, actually. But I'm not here criticizing the craft that this guy has, because
Hmm.
clearly they've definitely got a very deep understanding of the tools and how they can kind of build a cinematic image from the ground up. But I'm not wholly convinced that this is a person that fully understands storytelling at the same level of craft as he is at presenting characters.
Sure.
And what I feel here is that this is a brilliant proof of concept for for somebody saying, I can do this. But in and of itself, it's not a great story. Now, I suppose, given this is somebody that's just starting out, that's a perfectly fine position to be in. Particularly if you're going to go into being, somebody working on movies or adverts or whatever it is you're going to do. But I personally think there's a lot more that this guy can do. And I would have to say that whilst I definitely enjoyed this, what I will enjoy more is the next one that he does.
Hmm.
And I think the other thing I would say here is now, this is clearly somebody who's inspired by these medieval folk tales. And that's, you both said that that's definitely coming through. He even quotes a bit of Beowulf in there, a bit of the poetry. But I just wonder how much of it he's read. And that's why I would have been really interested to hear what Ricky would have to say about what sort of texts or historical objects or art would actually inspire you to create new types of stories that draw on that medieval imagery and storytelling. And that's what I want to see this guy do, because I think he's got all the skills apart from the real stories to do it. So I'm being super, super critical because I do think this guy can handle it, and I would love to see what he comes up with next.
Yes, story is tough, It's we talk a lot when we talk about craft in here, we tend to talk about more technical, modeling or animation or mocap or concepts like that. Um, those things have their own challenges for sure, but I think that there's more straightforward learning pathways for that, whereas story, anybody who tells you they know everything to teach you about story,
Yeah.
run fast, It's elusive, and there's kind of a magic to it that yeah, it's at any age it's challenging, but particularly for someone who's younger. Like writing, I mean, it's so much informed by life experience that yeah. So hopefully he'll focus on. I think the only thing harder than story in what we do is making clothing for Character Creator 4.
Well,
That's
yeah.
harder than screenplay writing for sure.
But I mean, even with that, once you one of these lucky people who can figure it out,
No,
you've
I'm
got that
kidding.
process. I know you are.
Only reason I point it out is because it's an area that I haven't delved into for study yet.
Well, I was
I'll
going to
get there.
say what I was going to say. Well, had Ricky been here, I would have said how much storytelling and old text do you think the folks delved into to create Elden Ring?
Oh,
And you know what? If this guy's really interested in this stuff, play that game.
I'll bet he does.
I bet he does as
I'll
well.
bet he plays Elden Ring.
It's
Yeah.
got a very Elden Ring kind of vibe to it.
It had a
It
bit,
does
hasn't it?
kind of. Yeah. That Dark Souls fantasy world type thing. Yeah.
Mm.
That's
Well,
the thing.
audience. Yeah, go
Wait,
ahead.
wait, wait, wait. The thing my last point is, we were just talking about the world of this film. The world of this film doesn't actually matter. It doesn't, like, we don't know anything about this world if it's a real place or a fantasy environment. It doesn't matter because that's not relevant to the story. That the world building, all we have is these characters, and as far as this story goes, that's all we need. We don't need to know the thousands of years of history building up to this encounter. which,
That's true.
yeah,
However, when we were talking about the Battlefront film
Mm.
a few films back, remember how you mentioned that they've got these really large sets, scenes built out, but you're sequestered to work within a certain area. But if you get up high, you can see the far end of the city.
yeah,
There's something to be said for that in story as well,
true,
that you're
true.
right. That thing on the other side of Mos Eisley doesn't matter for my mission, but it adds something to the experience to be able to see it. I
Yeah.
think that there's maybe a lesson there for story too, that it's tough because, you're trying to make it's a 7-minute film. He may have been working under a pretty severe time limit for this, and it takes time to introduce those things, but not as much time as you'd think.
Hmm.
You can do it visually, you know. So yeah, I think you both have a point there. Yeah, yeah.
It's a great
Well,
pick, though,
Oh yeah.
yeah, I enjoyed it. I've been sitting on it
for a
I'm
while.
glad you
for a
finally
couple
shared it.
months. Yeah, yeah. Well, audience, what did you think? Was Tracy wrong, or was Tracy wrong? You decide. We would love to hear your comments on this film, and if you know of any other interesting work done by students who are studying this stuff, we would love to take a look at that. There's some fresh things that can emerge out of people who have kind of had an accelerated training that many of us in this craft are self-taught. We take the long road, right? So somebody who gets to study all this at that age, just it's amazing. We'd love to see more of that. So let us know in the comments what you think, or drop us an email at talk@completelymachinima.com. My name is Phil Rice, and on behalf of my co-hosts, Damien Valentine and the wrong Tracy Harwood, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.